The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Sterling Hotel cast fractured rainbows across the marble floor as Sarah Chen adjusted her daughter's velvet dress for the third time. Emma, her 7-year-old, stood patiently, her dark eyes scanning the crowded ballroom with that particular mixture of curiosity and wariness that Sarah had come to recognize. It was the look of a child who knew she was different, who had learned to read rooms not through sound but through the subtle shifts in people's faces when they realized she couldn't hear them. "Ready, sweetheart," Sarah signed, her hands moving with practiced fluidity. Emma nodded, but her small fingers twisted nervously in the fabric of her dress. Sarah's heart clenched. This annual Christmas dinner was supposed to be a celebration, a chance for her company's executives and their families to come together. But for Emma, it was another evening of standing on the periphery, watching mouths move in conversations she couldn't join, seeing other children laugh at jokes that never reached her. Sarah was the youngest CEO in her company's history, having clawed her way up through 16-hour days and weekend strategy sessions. She'd fought twice as hard after her divorce 3 years ago, determined to prove that being a single mother wouldn't dim her edge. But standing here, watching her daughter's shoulders hunch slightly as they approached the crowd, Sarah wondered if all her professional victories meant anything at all. The dinner was already in full swing. Executives clustered in groups, their laughter rising above the soft classical music. Children darted between tables, their excited shrieks piercing the air. Sarah felt Emma's hand tighten around hers. "Mom, can I sit at our table?" Emma signed, her movements small and hesitant. Before Sarah could respond, Marcus Webb, her VP of Operations, approached with his usual broad smile. "Sarah, and this must be Emma. I've heard so much about you, young lady." He extended his hand toward Emma, speaking too loudly, as people often did when they learned she was deaf. Emma stared at his outstretched hand, then looked up at Sarah with confusion. "She can't hear you, Marcus," Sarah said gently, signing simultaneously for Emma. "And she reads lips, but it's easier if you face her directly and speak normally." Marcus's face flushed. "Oh, right, of course. I'm sorry." He bent down awkwardly, speaking directly at Emma with exaggerated lip movements. "It's nice to meet you." Emma gave a polite smile, the kind Sarah had taught her to offer in these moments, then stepped closer to her mother's side. Marcus straightened, nodded uncomfortably, and quickly excused himself. This was how it always went. Well-meaning people who didn't know how to bridge the gap, leaving Emma feeling more isolated with each failed interaction. Sarah guided her daughter toward their assigned table, mentally calculating how early they could leave without seeming rude. The table was near the center of the room, surrounded by other executives and their families. As they approached, Sarah noticed a man already seated there, a boy about Emma's age sitting beside him. The man was reviewing what appeared to be a seating chart, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up as they arrived, and Sarah was struck by the warmth in his eyes, a genuine kindness that seemed rare in her corporate world. "Hi, I'm David Torres," he said, standing and extending his hand to Sarah. "I'm the new Chief Technology Officer. Started 2 weeks ago. Sarah Chen, CEO. Welcome aboard." She shook his hand, noting the firm but not aggressive grip. "This is my daughter, Emma." David turned to Emma and, to Sarah's surprise, his hands began to move in fluid, confident sign language. "Hello, Emma. It's wonderful to meet you. This is my son, Lucas." Emma's eyes widened, her whole face transforming. Her hands flew up in response. "You know sign language." "I do," David signed back, his smile broadening. "Lucas is deaf too." Lucas, who had been watching quietly, now grinned and waved at Emma. She waved back, a genuine smile spreading across her face for the first time that evening. Sarah felt something crack open in her chest. She'd seen Emma interact with other deaf children at her special school, but never in a setting like this, surrounded by her mother's work world. Never with someone who made it seem so effortless, so normal. "I didn't realize you had a son," Sarah said, surprised at the slight tremor in her voice. "The HR files didn't mention." "Single dad," David explained, switching back to speaking while still signing for the children. "Lucas's mom passed away 4 years ago. Cancer. It's just been the two of us since then." "I'm so sorry," Sarah said, and meant it. She signed the conversation for Emma, who had already turned her full attention to Lucas. The two children were signing rapidly to each other, their faces animated in a way that made Sarah's throat tight. As the dinner progressed, Sarah found herself watching David more than she cared to admit. He moved seamlessly between speaking with the adults at the table and signing with the children, never making either group feel excluded. When the waiter came to take orders, David asked him to face Lucas directly, explaining patiently how to communicate with him. The waiter, a young man who seemed nervous, responded with careful attention, speaking clearly and waiting for Lucas to indicate he understood. "You're good at this," Sarah said quietly, as the children became engrossed in a conversation about their favorite video games. David shrugged. "I've had practice. Lucas was born deaf. His mother and I learned sign language before he was even born, once we knew. We wanted him to grow up feeling like his language was just as valid as anyone else's. That must have been challenging." "It was the opposite, actually." David's gaze softened as he watched his son. "Learning ASL, immersing ourselves in deaf culture, it opened up an entire world we never knew existed. Lucas taught us more than we ever taught him." Sarah thought about her own journey. Emma had lost her hearing at 4 years old due to meningitis. The diagnosis had come just months before Sarah's husband left, overwhelmed by the medical bills and the life changes he hadn't signed up for. Sarah had learned sign language through online courses and community classes, rushing through lessons between meetings, practicing fingerspelling during her commute. She'd done her best, but there was always a sense that she was playing catch-up, that Emma lived in a world Sarah could visit but never fully inhabit. Emma lost her hearing when she was 4, Sarah found herself saying. After meningitis, "It's been 3 years, and I still feel like I'm failing her sometimes." David turned to look at her fully, his expression serious. "Why do you say that?" Sarah gestured around the ballroom. "Look at her. This is my world, my career, all these people I work with. And she's always on the outside looking in. I bring her to these events thinking I'm including her in my life, but really I'm just highlighting how different she is. She doesn't look like she's on the outside right now." Sarah followed his gaze. Emma and Lucas had moved their chairs closer together and were deep in animated conversation, their hands flying, their faces bright with laughter. Emma was showing Lucas something on her phone, and he was responding with exaggerated surprise that made her giggle. It was such a simple moment, but Sarah realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd seen Emma this relaxed, this happy, outside of her school for the deaf. "You've given her an incredible gift," David continued. "You learned her language, you advocate for her, you bring her into your world even when it's hard. That's not failing, Sarah. That's love." Before Sarah could respond, Marcus appeared at their table again, this time with several other executives in tow. "Sarah, we need you for a moment. Peterson wants to discuss the merger details before his flight tomorrow." Sarah felt the familiar tug of professional obligation. She glanced at Emma, who was still engrossed in conversation with Lucas. "Go," David said, noticing her hesitation. "I'll keep an eye on both of them." "You don't have to. I want to. Besides, Lucas could use a friend who really gets it. So could Emma, I think." Sarah nodded, touching Emma's shoulder to get her attention. "I need to talk with some people for work. Stay here with Lucas and his dad, okay?" Emma's face fell slightly, but when she saw that Lucas was staying too, she nodded. "How long?" "Not long. 20 minutes. Okay, Mom." Sarah followed Marcus across the ballroom, but her attention kept drifting back to the table. She could see David leaning in, clearly following the children's conversation, occasionally joining in with a comment that made them both laugh. At one point, a waiter approached with dessert menus, and David gently got his attention, then gestured to the children, indicating they should be given the menus directly. The waiter complied, squatting down to their level and pointing to the various options while they chose. It was such a small thing, but it spoke volumes. David wasn't just accommodating Lucas's deafness, he was actively creating a world where it didn't matter, where his son had the same autonomy and respect as anyone else. "Sarah, are you listening?" Peterson's voice cut through her thoughts. "Sorry, yes, you were saying about the Q4 projections." She forced herself to focus, but the meeting felt interminable. When she finally extracted herself and returned to the table, she found the children had been joined by 2 other kids from the party, both hearing. David was teaching them basic signs, turning it into a game. "Okay, so this is how you say, friend," David demonstrated, and the children copied him. Lucas and Emma were patient teachers, correcting the other kids' hand positions and giggling when someone got it hilariously wrong. Sarah stood at the edge of the scene, watching. One of the children, a girl about 9, turned to Emma. "Can you teach me how to say, Merry Christmas?" Emma's face lit up, her hands moved slowly, deliberately, showing the sign. The girl copied her, and Emma nodded enthusiastically, then responded with, "Merry Christmas," back to her. The girl beamed. David noticed Sarah's return and stood, though he kept one eye on the children. "They've been like this for the past 15 minutes. I think we started something." "Thank you," Sarah said, and was horrified to feel tears prickling at her eyes. "You have no idea what this means." "I think I do, actually." David's voice was gentle. "The world isn't always kind to our kids. Watching them find moments where they can just be themselves, where they're celebrated instead of accommodated, it's everything." Sarah blinked rapidly, trying to compose herself. She was the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. She'd negotiated multi-million-dollar deals without flinching. But here, watching her daughter laugh freely, teach her language with pride instead of resignation, she felt like she might fall apart. "I've been so focused on making sure Emma could function in the hearing world," Sarah admitted. "Making sure she could lip read well enough, that she knew how to ask for what she needed, that she wouldn't fall behind. But I forgot to show her that her world, the deaf world, was something beautiful. Something worth sharing." "It's not too late," David said. "It's never too late to learn and grow together." The evening continued, but something had shifted. Sarah found herself sitting back down at the table, declining other invitations to network and schmooze. Instead, she asked David about Lucas's school, about the deaf community events they attended, about the small and large ways he'd learned to navigate a world that wasn't built for his son. David, in turn, asked about her work, about the challenges of leading a company while raising a child alone, about her dreams beyond the quarterly reports and board meetings. They talked like old friends, like people who understood each other's burdens without judgment. At one point, Emma climbed into Sarah's lap, tired but happy. "Mom, Lucas invited me to his birthday party next month. Can I go?" Sarah looked at David, who nodded. "It's at a deaf community center. There'll be about 20 kids, mostly deaf, some hearing. Lucas would love to have Emma there." "Of course you can go," Sarah signed to Emma, then spoke to David. "Thank you, really." As the dinner began to wind down, families collecting coats and saying goodbyes, Emma and Lucas exchanged phone numbers, or rather, Sarah and David's numbers so the children could arrange video calls. Lucas showed Emma how he used FaceTime to sign with his friends, and Emma was ecstatic at the prospect. Walking to their car, Emma's hand in hers, Sarah felt lighter than she had in years. Emma was practically skipping, signing excitedly about everything she and Lucas had discussed, about the new friends she'd made, about how David had taught everyone the sign for chocolate cake when dessert arrived. "Did you have fun tonight?" Sarah signed when they reached the car. Emma stopped and looked up at her mother, her expression suddenly serious. "Mom, I wasn't different tonight. Or, I was, but it was okay. Lucas was different too, and those other kids wanted to learn our language. They thought it was cool." Sarah knelt down, bringing herself to Emma's eye level. "Your language is cool, sweetheart. You're cool. I'm sorry if I ever made you feel like you had to hide who you are." Emma threw her arms around Sarah's neck. "I love you, Mom. I love you too, baby. So much." That night, after Emma had fallen asleep, Sarah sat in her home office, staring at her computer screen. She'd been drafting an email to HR about diversity initiatives for the coming year, but her mind kept wandering to David's words, to the ease with which he'd created space for both children to thrive. On impulse, she opened a new document and began writing. Not about business strategies or quarterly goals, but about what she'd witnessed that evening. About the power of representation, of seeing someone who understood. About the importance of bringing more diverse voices into leadership, not as a checkbox exercise, but because those voices changed the culture, created space for others to belong. By the time she finished, it was past midnight, and she had outlined a comprehensive plan for recruiting and supporting employees with disabilities, particularly deaf and hard of hearing staff. She'd also researched ASL classes her company could sponsor, ways to make their offices and meetings more accessible, partnerships with deaf organizations. It wasn't enough, she knew. One evening's revelation couldn't undo years of unexamined assumptions. But it was a start. 3 days later, David knocked on her office door. "Got a minute?" "Of course. Come in." Sarah gestured to the chair across from her desk. David sat, looking slightly nervous. "I heard through the grapevine that you're proposing some major accessibility initiatives. I wanted to offer my help, if you'd like it. I've worked with several companies on this stuff, and I know the pitfalls." "I'd love your help," Sarah said immediately. In fact, I was going to ask. You probably know more about this than anyone else in the building. I don't know about that, but I'm passionate about it. David leaned forward. Sarah, what you're doing, it's going to change lives. Not just for employees who are deaf or disabled, but for their families, their children. When Lucas sees people like him in professional spaces, when he sees that doors are open to him, it changes what he believes is possible. That's what I want for Emma too, Sarah admitted. She's brilliant, David. She's creative and funny and so smart it scares me sometimes. But I worry that the world will only see what she can't do instead of everything she can. Then we change the world, David said simply. Or at least our little corner of it. Over the following months, Sarah and David worked closely together, both on the accessibility initiatives and, increasingly, on projects that had nothing to do with their original collaboration. They had lunch meetings that stretched into the afternoon. They exchanged texts about their children, about work challenges, about the small frustrations and victories of single parenthood. Emma and Lucas became inseparable. They had standing video call dates every Tuesday and Thursday evening, chattering away in ASL about school and friends and whether dinosaurs or dragons would win in a fight. On weekends, the families began meeting at parks, at museums, at the deaf community events that David had introduced them to. Sarah found herself learning more than she'd ever imagined. She attended ASL classes, not the rushed online courses she'd taken before, but real immersion programs where she met other parents, other adults in the deaf community. She learned about deaf culture, about the pride and richness of it, about the painful history of oralism and the ongoing fights for recognition and rights. And slowly, she fell in love. Not just with David, though that happened too, in quiet moments when he'd explain some technical concept with infectious enthusiasm, or when she'd watch him sign with his son with such tenderness it made her heart ache. But she fell in love with the community, with the beauty of a language that existed in space and movement, with the resilience of people who'd been told they were broken and had responded by building something whole and wonderful. 6 months after that Christmas dinner, Sarah stood in front of her company's board of directors, presenting the results of their accessibility initiatives. They'd hired 12 new employees who were deaf or hard of hearing. They'd implemented video relay services, trained all staff in basic ASL, and redesigned their meeting protocols to be more inclusive. Productivity had increased. Employee satisfaction scores were at an all-time high. Several other companies had reached out, asking to learn from their model. But the most important change wasn't in the numbers or the policies. It was in the culture. It was in the way people now waved hello in the hallways, using the sign they'd learned. It was in the mixed groups at lunch tables, hearing and deaf employees chatting in whatever language worked, with patience and creativity. It was in the knowledge that difference wasn't something to be overcome, but something to be celebrated. After the presentation, David met her outside the boardroom. How'd it go? They loved it. They want to expand the program internationally. That's amazing, Sarah. You should be proud. She smiled. I couldn't have done it without you. Yes, you could have. But I'm glad I got to be part of it. He paused, looking uncharacteristically nervous. Listen, I wanted to ask you something. Emma's birthday is next week, and Lucas wants to help plan a surprise for her. Would you be okay with that? Of course. What kind of surprise? That's the surprise part. But I promise, nothing dangerous or messy. Well, not too messy. Sarah laughed. Okay, I trust you. On Emma's birthday, Sarah came home from work to find her house transformed. David and Lucas had decorated with streamers and balloons, each one labeled with a sign in ASL. Emma's friends from both schools, deaf and hearing, had been invited, and they were all wearing t-shirts David had made that said, Emma's Birthday Crew, in English and ASL. But the real gift was in the living room. David had created a video montage of Emma's life, 7 years of moments big and small. But he'd done something extraordinary with it. He'd added captions for every spoken word, and for the sections where Emma signed, he'd added voice.